right. Well, this week we are in the second part of a series called Reclaiming Wonderful. If you're new with us, what we like to do is we take our messages and we clump them together in a series with a common theme and sometimes progress on one week to the next. But we're talking about the things that make, or supposedly make, the Christmas season wonderful. Wonderful. And so maybe you picked up in our little bumper, the song, "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year" by someone named Andy Williams. It's a pretty popular song. It's in the top 10 right now of like all Christmas songs everywhere. You know that song? I'm not going to sing it, but you know what I'm talking about, right? It's the most wonderful time. Yeah. So I've been looking at that song. There's some really interesting lines in that song. He talks about ghost stories. I don't know about that. I don't know who's telling ghost stories around Christmas time. He also takes some nouns and turns them into verbs, like mistletoeing and kids jingle belling. And these are the things that make it the most wonderful time of the year. Now, I don't know about you, but I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And if I were to give them bells, I think it'd be wonderful for about 5 minutes. They'd be like, all right, give me the bells, So we're talking about the things that supposedly make this season wonderful. If you go a little bit deeper, you'll see on Christmas cards these themes that keep popping up. They're themes that pop up in what we call Advent, right? It's things like joy, hope, peace, love. And what you'll hear is, it's a season of joy, it's a season of peace, the season of hope, the season of love. And so last week we said, really, what is that, right? What are we talking about? Do we just try a little extra hard during the Christmas season to be hopeful or to be loving? Or what if for you the Christmas season doesn't naturally stir up those feelings? What if it's a hard season for you? Then do you just not get to participate in the whole joy and hope, peace side of the Christmas season? And in the seasons that come after the Christmas season? Or is there a way back to really, really wonderful, actually having joy, actually having peace, hope, love, and to feel loved? So how do we get there? Last week, we talked really practically. We talked about joy, and you can dive into this message on your own if you want. It's online. But we said really the way back to joy, according to Jesus and his followers who came after him, and also according to people who like to study things like this, it comes back to gratitude and generosity. Or we said, to kind of simplify it a little bit, it comes back to seeing the good in your own life and looking to give into the lives of others. And there's something about that gives us joy. And like I said, you can check that out on your own. But this week, what we're talking about is something called hope. It's another one of these Christian Christmas buzzwords. Hear it all the time. It's a season of hope. This is the moneymaker in the Christmas season. Hope, really what hope is it's desire and anticipation. If you look it up, or if you ask Google or Siri or Jeeves, whoever you ask, that's what they'll tell you. It's desire. Okay, no one's asking Jeeves anymore. Desire, you want something, and then there's this expectation that it will be fulfilled. It's not just wanting, it's wanting and waiting for the fulfillment. It's wanting what's gonna happen on Christmas morning, especially as a kid, and just waiting for it, knowing it's on the way. It's the feeling of anticipation. And from that, there's joy, there's excitement, there's so much that comes from that. As a kid, that's what kept me up at night on Christmas Eve. That's what got me counting down the days to Christmas. It's really the hope of Christmas, the desire and the anticipation that hope will be fulfilled. And if for you, Christmas wasn't super magical and you need an example, well, it's like when you buy something online and they give you a tracking number, right? It's like, ooh, it left Kansas City and it's in Hoboken, And you just count down the stops and you're waiting and it's exciting and you're hoping that it's gonna be fulfilled. Desire and expectation. desire and anticipation. It's exciting. It's exciting. And it gives us joy. It gives us joy. But like with Christmas, really the hope of the Christmas season specifically, just in the way we experience it, it's at best, it's short-lived. And at worst, it's circumstantial. You know, it's short-lived if you've ever experienced, especially as a child, if Christmas was a positive experience for you, you know the difference between December 24th and December 26th. There was a huge letdown, right? You've already tried all your toys. Or if you're older, all the festivities are gone, the presents are unwrapped, and now you got to take down the lights, and it's colder than it was when you put them up. There's a letdown. It's short-lived. But it's also circumstantial, meaning, like for you, I'm sure there are people in this room that are not into Christmas. Maybe it's not desire and anticipation. Maybe it's dread and obligation. It was a really hard time for you growing up. Maybe it's become a really hard time for you recently. So then what? Like, do you just not get to experience, participate in hope during the Christmas season? Hope, last week we talked about Turbo Man, or we gave away a Turbo Man. Now, I don't want to spoil the movie Jingle All the Way, but if you haven't seen it, I'm probably going to spoil it. So you plug your ears if you don't want to know how it ends. But it's this story about a little boy who wants a toy. He wants a Turbo Man. And there's a dad who, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who wants to get him this toy and just can't seem to get his hands on it. It's because he waited till the last minute, but give the guy a break, right? So he's trying to get his hands on this toy and he just can't, and you're watching it and you're just waiting. You're waiting and you can sense it and you know it's the hope is going to be fulfilled. You know in the end it's all going to just like come together nicely, and it does so nicely at the end. He ends up being in a parade. He gets his son, the Turbo Man doll, and he's dressed up as Turbo Man in the parade, and he happens to also save his son's life during the parade. And so he gives the boy his doll. He's so excited. And then the boy gives the doll away, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, why would you do that? I finally got this for you. And he looks at his dad. He's like, I got the real thing. And it's like, oh man, like it's just warm and fuzzies like crazy, you know? And it all comes together. And you see, he really wanted to be the hero, and it's just a beautiful picture. It all comes together. All works out real nice. But sometimes in life, hope isn't that clean. Sometimes your circumstances don't make it look like it's all coming together. And often it feels like it's all falling apart. The story of Christmas, like the Christmas story with Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, specifically Mary's role in the story, helps us to see something really profound about the nature of hope, and often misunderstood. And if hope for you this Christmas season, no matter where you stand, like with your faith, if it's a little messy, I think Mary's experience can help us out. If you know the story, Mary, she's got a pretty good reputation. Like, she got a lot of things going for her. She's known as a pretty good girl. And then one day, she's all by herself, and she has this miraculous, life-changing experience. She sees this angel. And the angel gives her a message and says, you will conceive. You're going to be pregnant and give birth to a son. Spoiler, no gender reveal. You're going to give birth to a son. And you don't get to pick the name either. His name's going to be Jesus, which is good news. Especially at that time, in like the ancient Jewish world, women, they wanted to have children because they understood it as their place in the role of their nation, in the role of what God had promised them. And so this is good news, but it gets even better. She says, you'll call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, the Son of God. He says, the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, which is a reference to King David, like David and Goliath. He says, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. Now, if you're not like a scholar in the Old Testament or you're not familiar with all the stories, the idea here is that Mary and her people, they were waiting for the hero to come. They were living in oppression under the Roman Empire. Life was hard, and they were waiting for someone to come and save them. And in their version of the Bible, they had been told God is going to send someone to save you. He'll send what they called the Messiah, the hero, the rescuer, the deliverer. And it says he's going to come from King David's family line. That's the reference to David. And the reference to Jacob is basically saying he'll rule over Israel. And so Mary's sitting there, she's told, you're gonna have a baby. And she's like, oh, great. And this is not any baby. This is gonna be known as like the Son of God. The person, your whole people group, your whole nation, all your friends, your parents, your grandparents, the one they've been waiting for, he's coming, and he's coming through you. And it's this like just unbelievable privilege. It's great news. But she has a question. And with this question, she gets real personal, real quick with the angel. She says, how will this be? Mary asked the angel, since I'm a virgin. There's something that hasn't happened that normally happens, right? I'm not married. She was engaged at the time to someone named Joseph, but she wasn't married. And the angel explains, this is gonna be a miracle. It's gonna be a miraculous conception. And this baby will be known as the Son of God. And so there's this moment of light, right? Of like, extreme hope and excitement, desire, anticipation. Boom, it's fantastic. And you know, she's like, oh yes. But then reality hits for Mary. And following the oh yes is an oh no. You see, for Mary, to be pregnant and to not be married, that wasn't gonna fly in her culture. And she was engaged at the time. So what she was doing would have been, what people thought she did would have been considered unfaithful. If you're familiar with some of the other stories in the New Testament, you might know that when Jesus grew up, there was a woman who cheated on her husband, and she was thrown out in front of the whole town and humiliated, shamed. And that's the reality Mary's got to deal with. It's a possibility of her circumstances. And so she tells Joseph what happens, and he's not buying it. Okay, you're telling me this hero's coming, and you're gonna give birth and you're pregnant, and there was no one else? He doesn't buy it, and he decides we're done. It's over. But he's a nice guy, and he decides to do it quietly, to not make it too hard on Mary. But for Mary, what she's looking at basically is a life, the rest of her life, for a woman in that culture. It was very likely that she would have been disowned by her family. This would have brought shame to her family. They wouldn't have wanted to associate with her. And now she's had the man she was going to marry. He doesn't want anything to do with her. She's basically sentenced to a life of shame and poverty with her child. And things are looking real dark, real fast. It goes from this mountaintop experience to all of a sudden, like, now I have to deal with reality. And it's not looking super hopeful. Well, thankfully, Joseph has a dream. And in this dream, he gets a message from God and basically is told, all right, Mary's telling the truth. Like, it sounds crazy, but yeah, she's telling the truth. Take her as your wife. And he does. And he says, okay. But for him, it's the same thing. It says, oh yes, wow, this does sound amazing, but oh no. Because now he's entering into that shameful reputation. Now his name is going to be tarnished because they're still not married. And that kind of stuff did not fly in that culture. And so they've got to deal with like the social isolation, the people that no longer want to associate with them anymore. Mary actually leaves town. She leaves town for 3 months. She goes to spend some time with her cousin. Her name's Elizabeth, and she ends up being the mother of John the Baptist. There's something special going on with Elizabeth. To make a long story short, Elizabeth understands what's going on in Mary's life. And so she stays there for 3 months. And some people who study this would say that probably the reason why she stayed there was to avoid the humiliation that she was dealing with at home. Just to get around that one person who understands you. To get away from all the people that know you and know your story. Well, some time passes. She goes home. And eventually, she's 9 months pregnant. And it's getting real close to the time she's got to give birth. And Rome, like the Roman Empire, the governing power that they live under, decide that they're gonna count their chips. They want to see how many people they have. They love the fact that they conquered all these different people, and every once in a while they want to stop and just see how well they're doing. And so they issue a decree that everyone's got to go back to their hometown so that people can be counted. And Joseph, his hometown was Bethlehem. And so he's got to go back to Bethlehem. And Mary decides to go with him. But we don't know if Mary even had to go. Like, they weren't married. And so Mary would not necessarily have had to register with Joseph in the town of Bethlehem, but she goes. And the people who look into this stuff would say probably it was because she didn't want to be left alone in the humiliation that she was living with. And to give you an extent of just how badly she would have wanted to get out of there, from Nazareth, which is where Mary was, to Bethlehem was 90 miles. To give you, just kind of put that in perspective, that would be like walking from here to the Empire State Building and back, or walking from here to Montauk Lighthouse. Walking. 9 months pregnant. How bad would your situation have to be willing to do that? Or maybe she rode a donkey, but if she did, it would have been longer because donkeys traveled slower than people did when they were walking. And on this journey, at that time of the year, it could have gotten as low as 30 degrees. There would have been danger on the road. There were pirates, like thieves, that would rob people as they were traveling from one place to another. There were animals, wild animals, that posed a threat to their lives. There were lions and bears in that part of the world. No tigers, but lions and bears. It was a real threat. 90 miles. And she goes. And you know she's got to be thinking through all of this, I don't know if this is if she expected it to be this dark. That moment when she sees the angel's like, you're gonna be the mother of the Son of God. I don't think this is how she saw it unfolding. And so she travels 90 miles and they get to Bethlehem. And they're told that there's no place for them. You know, some people will say they stopped at an inn. We don't really know. All we know is that there is no place for them. There's no room available for them. And it could be, maybe, Bethlehem was extra busy because there was a census, or it very easily could have been that no one wanted to be associated with them. Joseph had come back home with a woman who was pregnant, and they weren't married. And so in that culture, you just kind of kept your distance from situations like that. And so it's time for the baby to come. They're pushed out, they're rejected, there's no space for them. And Mary is like, it's time. And when it's time, it's time. And so we don't know exactly where. You know, some of our nativity scenes show like a barn. We don't know if it was a barn. It could have been a cave. But there was some place where they found shelter, and we know there would have been animals there that rested there and ate there. And they stop, and she gives birth. Alone, probably on the ground, because there's no room for them. And I imagine at that moment, God probably seemed pretty far away. There was probably some question as to whether or not he was going to come through on what he said. Like, things aren't all falling into place. It's not all coming together. It's all falling apart. It's one thing after the next. And here's how Luke records it. He says, after she gave birth, she wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. There's no place for them. Now, if you know the Christmas story, if you're even remotely familiar with it, you know that she placed him in a manger. That's where Jesus goes in our little nativity scenes. Where else would we put him? Thank goodness this line's in there, right? But the writers of the New Testament, guys like Luke, they weren't like super creative with their writing. They didn't add a lot of detail. They just said things how they were. And when they included little details, they carried a tremendous amount of meaning. Like, think about it. If you step back, why? Why are we told that he was wrapped in cloth and placed in a manger? There were so many other things that happened. We don't know where they were. We don't even know if they were in a barn or in a cave or what, but we're told she put him in a manger. Why? Why? When you and I think of Jesus, little baby Jesus in a manger, you probably picture something like this. There he is on like a really nicely set up pile of hay on a clean little basket with a baby lamb just looking on as the moonlight adds a gentle glow to his clean face. Right? Like, I would snuggle up on that. That's nice. And that gives us a lot of feelings, right? We're like, oh, isn't that sweet? You know, it's like an old-fashioned crib. But the word manger, it's not supposed to bring those kinds of feelings. It's supposed to feel more like Mary put baby Jesus in this. Now, this is obviously like a modern day portrayal of a manger. It probably wasn't metal. It probably wasn't rusted. There probably weren't cows with tags on their ears either. But this is a way more accurate picture, or a way more accurate depiction of the kind of vibe that comes with a manger. It's gross. It's unsanitary. There are animals with their faces in there, with their snot and their spit and their chewed up food. It's gross. And so for Luke to include Mary wrapped him up and she put him in a manger, this was like the culmination of the brokenness in the story. This is how bad things got. It's an important detail that shows us just how horrible their situation was. It would be like me saying, I went through a really difficult season in life and for months we just ate rice and beans. You would connect the dots and be like, okay, there must have been some serious financial struggle there, right? Like that's what this is saying. There is no place to put the baby and there's no one to hold him. They've just finished a 90-mile journey and she's just given birth. And there's no one to hand the baby off to. They're utterly exhausted. They're depleted. They're isolated. They're alone. And Luke telling us it got so bad, she wrapped him and she put him in a manger. It is the symbol of the difficulty of their situation. It's the culmination of the brokenness that they're experiencing. And in this moment, it's like, where's God? Like, who turned out the lights? Right? I thought that we were part of something meaningful. Is God gonna come through for us? Or is this how bad it got? What would it take for you to put your newborn baby, your firstborn newborn baby, because by like the second and third, we don't sanitize the binky anymore, right? But your firstborn, what would it take for you to put a child in that? Brokenness. Then something cool happens, and this is my favorite part in this story. Nearby, there are these shepherds, and shepherds, in spite of what our nativity scenes show us, they weren't these like cute, friendly little guys. They were outcasts. They were rough, tough outcasts that were pushed out of all religious activities. And these angels visit these shepherds, and they're like, we've got good news that's going to bring great joy to all people. Right over there in Bethlehem, the hero that your people have been waiting for, he's here. He's a baby, and you get to go see him. And they said this, here's how you'll know. Here's how you'll know it's him. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. that's how you're going to recognize him. There are a million different ways the angel could have told the shepherd to recognize this baby. They could have said, go over to that town over there, look for the lady that just gave birth. All right, if there's two of them, her name's Mary. If there's two Marys, she's with a Joseph. Their relationship is complicated right now. Right? There's a million different ways. You could have given them, it could have said they're by the big tree. No, but there's going to be a baby, and it's going to be in a manger. And so if you imagine what it would be like to be Mary and Joseph at that point, just like your lowest point, the point I guarantee you Mary would not have wanted to be included in this story, that she put the baby in a manger. At her darkest point, when it feels like God is furthest away, all of a sudden people show up and they're like, we were told there's something special about this baby. And we were told that we know who it was. We know that this is true because we were told he'd be in that. It's as if in that moment, they're assured that God is intimately aware of every detail and difficulty in their story. He knew there would be a manger in their story. And that doesn't mean he's not going to come through for them. Though she wouldn't have wanted it to go this way, though this isn't how she would have written the story, he knew there would be a manger in the story. And right after this, we're told that Mary, she takes these words, she's in this difficulty, she takes these words, this like moment of light that she's given, this moment of encouragement, this moment of hope, when she's reminded God will come through, even when it looks like he won't. It says she takes these words and she treasured them up. She treasured up all these things and she pondered them in her heart. The word for treasured there, it means to protect, to hold on to, like the way you would protect a candle that's lit. Like you wouldn't let anything get to it. She heard these things, she had these moments of hope, and she held on to them with everything that she had. So she could be sure that even when it seemed like God had forgotten them, even when it seemed like the lights had gone out, God was still gonna come through. Hope, we could say, is confidence that God will come through. Not in light of our circumstances, but in spite of our circumstances. We don't hope because it seems like everything is coming together in the end and Turbo Man's gonna show up. We hope often when it feels like it's all falling apart. And our hope is that God will make good on what he said. Not in just, and this is the hard part, not in just like we pick what we want and we hope in that. You know, I'm sure Mary was hoping for a nice wedding. I'm sure she was hoping for a lot of friends. I'm sure she was hoping for a restored reputation. I'm sure there's a lot of things she was hoping for that she didn't get. But she wasn't promised those things. What she was promised was that God was doing something amazing through her. And he kept that promise. And so for you and for me, we can say that hope is confidence that God will come through. He will do what he said he will do. But it's not in how God will come through. Mary would not have written a manger in her story. But God knew it would be there. And so maybe for you, there's a manger in your story. Maybe there's something for you that has become the symbol of everything that is broken in your life. Something you would not have wanted to be in there. Something that's making you question what God has said. Right? If my relationship is looking this way, if my health is looking this way, if my life situation is looking this way, if I've got a manger in my story, well then maybe God isn't good. Maybe he's not really going to use these difficult things to bring good. Maybe he's forgotten me. Maybe he doesn't care about my future. Maybe I don't matter. There will be mangers in your story. Jesus himself had a manger. And in this like beautiful twist, God takes the symbol of all of Mary's brokenness, the symbol of it all falling apart, and transforms it into a reminder that God will come through. He uses the manger to identify the baby when the shepherds come up and say, that's the one. That's the hero who's come. The most practical part of this whole story, I mentioned it before, is what Mary does when she hears these words. It says she pondered them, she treasured them, and she pondered what they might mean. She held on to them. She held on to them. For you and for me, I think this is where it gets real. This is where it gets practical. There are some things that God has told us. You know, you're probably not going to give birth to the Savior of the world, and you don't get to pick the things that God has promised you, but he has promised certain things. That you're loved, that you matter, that you have value, that he could take your hardship and bring good from it. And it's so easy to just let them go. But hope is holding on to them. And so that's why we want you to come to church on Sunday. We don't want you to feel guilty when you don't, but we do want you to come, to get a grip, to get perspective, to realign and remember, okay, there is a meaning to the mess that I'm in. There's a purpose to the pain that I'm going through. It's why we send out every single morning on our app, we send out a big idea for the day. We take something that God has said that you can hold on to, and we put a little explanation underneath it. Show you how it gets practical, so you can hold on to it. That's why I want you to read this stuff for yourself, not take my word for it, but go home and read it. Spend some time praying on your own, because all of these things help us to get a grip, hold on to them, and trust, okay, let's see when God comes through. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, but here's the picture I want to leave you with. In the story of the manger, like I said, there's this symbol, this like culmination of the brokenness in the manger. And then it gets transformed into this symbol of hope. The symbol that reminds Mary, God is still on his way. He hasn't forgotten you. There are a bunch of mangers in Mary's story. And the last one, specifically with Jesus, was when Jesus hung on a cross. And you bet she watched her son have his life taken from him. Watched him just be utterly humiliated on a cross. A cross, which is a symbol of brokenness. It's a symbol of isolation. It's a symbol of just how bad things have gotten. And he loses his life on that cross. He gives his life on that cross. What we would find out just a few days later, and what Jesus would explain, what his followers would explain after him, was that cross was an expression of love for us, of just how far he would go for us. And in that, he takes this symbol of brokenness, this symbol of Roman execution, this symbol of just how bad it can get, and he transforms it into a symbol of hope that people wear around their necks to remind them that God will come through. That the story is not over. Your story may have a manger in it, but it's not over. And if God can take a symbol of brokenness like a cross and turn it into a symbol of hope and of love, then how much more can he take the mangers in your life, the broken parts in your life, the messes in your life, the things you would have never written into your story, and use them to show you that he will come through, that your story is not over.